Okay, kids, here we are. It's the first episode of Full Potato Friday, one of the bonus podcasts that you get on the Hawk Droppings podcast site on our Patreon page. Again, I want to say a massive thank you to everyone who has followed me over here from my TikTok page. I appreciate every one of you guys immensely. And I'm going to use the word we a lot during my podcast episodes. And when I use the word we, I'm referring to me and my brother, Falcon. And again, I thanked him at the beginning of the Hawk Droppings podcast, but I'm going to do that again at the beginning of this one. We've been working on this for a couple of months. We've been working very, very hard on this for a couple of months. And he has been working extremely hard on this for a couple of months, figuring everything out. He's figuring everything out, everything related to the merch store, the merch. He's done a ton of the graphic design stuff for that and the logos, a lot of the logo work for these podcasts. And my buddy Wiseacre has done a ton of graphic design work for us as well. And a huge, huge thank you goes out to him. The thing that I'm becoming most aware of and grateful for in my brother over the last couple of months is his patience in dealing with me. And the unique skill set that he brings to managing this. I've also become keenly aware of the fact that I'm very likely not as pleasant to work with as I think I am. And oh my God, he and I have been through a lot together over the last 50 plus years. And it is an understatement for me to say that I am incredibly lucky and fortunate to have him in my life as my friend and my brother. And especially over the last 4 or 5 months. I mean, some of you know the things that I've gone through on TikTok during that period of time and the things that have happened in my life as a result of that in the last 4 or 5 months. And I mean, I wouldn't be sitting here today without that kid, man. I just wouldn't be. And his patience and skill in dealing with me and my little outbursts as we've been working through these projects over the last 2 months, it can't go unacknowledged. I'm incredibly grateful for him. And the fact that I get to work on these projects in partnership with him, the merch store and all of this stuff and these podcasts that we're doing, the amount of work that he and I have done to get to this point, you know, in mid-November, where I'm sitting here at this microphone recording this thing, and the amount of patience that he has exhibited in dealing with me and my impatience and my PTSD and my little outbursts. The fact that he and I are going to do some podcast episodes together in the near future. And I'm really looking forward to that for you guys, because I want you to get to see him more. I want you to have the opportunity to get to know him more, so that you can start to understand how lucky I am to have him as a brother and friend. And the fact that he and I are able to do these projects together is absolutely, without question, the biggest blessing and the biggest gift that has come into my life over the last 4 or 5 months, especially with all the things that have happened. And if all of those things hadn't happened, we probably wouldn't be doing this. Silver lining and all that shit. But I'm really looking forward to he and I doing some episodes together, because I want you guys to get to know him a bit as well. And so I'm looking forward to that. So on with the episode. Full Potato Friday. I mean, anybody who's followed my TikTok page for any period of time knows that on Fridays, I tend to do video replies to comments from folks on the right who, in my mind, have gone full potato. And you never want to go full potato. If you've gone full potato, that's it. That's bad. That's not a good thing. And one of the things I thought of about 5 minutes before I started recording this episode is that the Full Potato Friday podcast episodes would be the perfect opportunity to break out the full potato fart machine. So we're going to incorporate that. That is the extent of my abilities as far as, noises and whatnot to incorporate into the episode. And so that's going to be making an appearance here and there. So who are the potatoes that we're going to talk about this week? We have 4 potatoes that we're going to talk about this week. The first is Judge Eileen Cannon, the federal circuit court judge who's overseeing Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago classified documents case in Southern Florida. The second one we're going to talk about, and this one, when I start talking about this, you guys are going to think I'm making it up. You're going to think I'm making it up. Yeah. It's one of those things where it's like your jaw is going to hit the floor. And it's a woman from Minnesota named Marlene Bourne. You're just not going to believe me when I tell this story. Then we have the senior senator from the state of Utah, Mike Lee, insurrectionist and January 6th conspiracy theorist. Then we have Colorado Superior Court Judge Sarah B. Wallace, who issued an order, a decision, an opinion last Friday saying that Trump cannot be barred from the ballot over his activities on January 6th, even though she made a judicial determination and factual adjudication that he is an insurrectionist and engaged in insurrection against the United States, which is exactly what Section 3 of the 14th Amendment says. But we'll get to her in a few minutes. All right, let's start with Judge Eileen Cannon. I found an article recently that did a bit of a deep dive into her. And so one thing we're going to talk about a little bit more in a few weeks, but she's been engaged in some serious tomfoolery. Some serious tomfoolery. And occasionally, because I just talk for 45 minutes on these podcasts, I'm going to have a nice little sip of refreshing ice cold Coca-Cola. All right. So recently she issued an order. Donald Trump's attorneys had filed a motion to continue the trial date. The trial date is set for late May 2024. And she continued that hearing date until March 1st of 2024. So about 6 months out, something like that. At first glance, you might be like, okay, that's fine, whatever. Well, that prevented Fani Willis from taking that time slot, that date slot, June or July for her trial. Excuse me, Jack Smith, his trial in Washington, D.C. in front of Judge Chutkan, in which he's indicted Donald Trump for his activities around January 6th and his efforts to overturn the 2020 election, is set for March 4th, 2024. It's supposed to last a couple of months. So hopefully by the end of April, beginning of May in 2024, that's when Donald Trump will be a convicted felon before he's nominated by the GOP at their convention in July to be their presidential candidate. He will be a convicted felon by the time the GOP does that at their convention. Yeah, he's going to be a convicted felon, and they're going to nominate him for president anyway. Yeah. So there's that. But it turns out, think about all the things that we've heard about the conservative justices on the Supreme Court lately. All their little side real estate deals and RV deals and $500,000 vacations and whatnot. Well, it turns out that Judge Eileen Cannon has got some shadiness going on along those lines. She and her husband purchased a home in Vero Beach, Florida on August 24th of 2020 for $750,000. At the time, her husband was earning about $100,000 a year. At the time, she was an assistant U.S. attorney for the Southern District of Florida, earning about $70,000 a year. She, if I'm not mistaken, she's not on the loan and she's not on the title. Her husband purchased it. He purchased a $750,000 home while he was earning $100,000 a year, and she was earning $70,000 a year. Now, when they purchased this on August 24th of 2020, it was 3 months after Trump had nominated her to the judgeship that she currently holds. It was 3 months before she was confirmed for that position. Now, U.S. District Court judges earn $232,600 per year. So she didn't have that income confirmed when they bought this house 3 months before she was confirmed. Unless, I don't know, maybe she had some kind of document that put forth that she was already confirmed or she was going to be confirmed and it was guaranteed. We don't know. So there is some shiftiness going on with how she purchased this house. I would recommend any intrepid reporters out there to, I don't know, get the closing documents, get the loan documents for her home purchase and find out what kind of chicanery was going on. And the other thing, so she was born in Colombia to a Cuban mother and an American father, but she was raised in Miami. And during her confirmation hearings, even though she barely qualified for a mid-level recommendation from the American Bar Association because she hadn't been an attorney for very long, she didn't really have any trial experience. She had worked for kind of a corporate firm in Washington, D.C. for 10 or 15 years. And she had the bare minimum of time as an attorney to even be considered by the Bar Association for a judgeship. During her confirmation hearings, even the Democratic senators, when questioning her, they just went easy on her. They went easy on her. She got a whole bunch of Democratic votes when she got confirmed. But throughout that, starting in law school and throughout the entire first decade and a half that she was an attorney, she was a member of the Federalist Society. So it's safe to say that she was kind of guided into this position by Leonard Leo and his folks. But so let's talk about, her home purchase situation, that gets a full potato fart. Yeah, because there's tomfoolery going on there. There's tomfoolery. So let's talk about her full potato-ness as a judge. Remember when I think it was just a year ago last August of 2022, when the FBI executed their search warrant at Mar-a-Lago. And shortly thereafter, the case was assigned to her and Trump's attorneys filed a motion basically to prevent the DOJ from continuing its investigation, to prevent them from continuing to review documents, arguing that some of the items that had been taken from Mar-a-Lago were personal items and were not part of the search warrant. And she issued a couple of really dumb orders. And they were in the forms of written orders, written opinions that were appealable. And I know Jack Smith filed at least one appeal with the 11th Circuit, and which is a very conservative circuit. And even those conservative judges stopped just short of saying, you're incompetent and you don't know what you're doing, Judge Cannon. And they overturned her ruling with particular force in their language. And one of the arguments that Trump has been making throughout is that this is a political prosecution and it's election interference. And there were a couple of quotes in that first order that she issued. Let me find. Well, actually one commentator, Ben Meiselas from Midas Touch Network, noted that Cannon is using these. She switched how she's doing her orders so that they're not appealable anymore. And she did that on purpose because she didn't like getting overturned by the 11th Circuit. Getting overturned as a trial court judge is embarrassing because it means that you did something wrong and you don't know how to do your job. And she got overturned brutally by the 11th Circuit. And so she switched her orders. Instead of those types of orders where it was just like, okay, there's a motion and then there's an opposition, then we have a hearing and I'm going to write up this whole opinion. She couches all of her orders now in scheduling orders because scheduling orders are not appealable. You can't appeal a scheduling order. You can appeal a substantive order like the one I just talked about. So she's been doing all of her stuff now in this case through scheduling orders because scheduling orders cannot be appealed to the 11th Circuit. So she won't get overturned again. And that's how she's dragging this case out. She's dragging it out to the point where now, I always thought that because this case involved classified documents, it was a bit optimistic to think that it was going to go to trial before Election Day 2024, but now it's impossible. It's an impossibility because she's done these scheduling orders. And I'll talk more about that in a second. But Ben Meiselas from Midas Touch Network said, it may not look like there's a massive impact taking place, but there is. Judge Cannon is doing this precisely because she learned all the wrong lessons from 2022 when she was reversed by the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals in another case involving Donald Trump. She was overruled twice in absolutely scathing orders from the appellate court. And now what she is doing in this case is she's not actually issuing orders. Instead, she's doing these piecemeal, paperless scheduling orders. And it's basically just changes to the trial scheduling that involves some other things thrown in for flavor. But those are not appealable. And she just keeps putting off deadlines. And going back to Trump's argument that this is election interference and this is a political prosecution, she essentially agrees with that and disagrees with the 11th Circuit when they overturned her in that regard. So a couple of quotes from one of her orders. A wrongful indictment is no laughing matter. It often works a grievous, irreparable injury to the person indicted. The stigma cannot easily be erased. In the public mind, the blot on a man's, it's a word I don't understand, escutcheon, Escutcheon, escutcheon. Ooh, I'm scooching with my escutcheon. I don't know what that word means. Reputation, maybe? Resulting from such a public accusation of wrongdoing is seldom wiped out by a subsequent judgment of not guilty. And so, in other words, she agrees with Trump that this is a political prosecution and it's election interference. And so she has switched to these scheduling orders to just push everything out because you can't appeal those. At best, Jack Smith might have a basis to go to the 11th Circuit and try to have her removed for bias, but that's a pretty high ladder. That's a pretty hard climb. So we're going to have to see what happens with that. But Judge Eileen Cannon gets a full potato fart for that behavior. Okay. Next. Here we go, kids. Marlene Bourne. Who is Marlene Bourne? Marlene Bourne is a woman who lives in Minnesota. She is an artist. She has always been a little bit different, according to her. She has a highly tuned awareness to things going on around her. She has traveled extensively. She's never quite fit in. She thinks differently from other people, admits that her life is a little strange, and that many people in her life think that she is a little strange. With that foundation having been laid, let's go back to the 2020 election. On Saturday, November 7th, is when the networks all called Joe Biden had won. It was in the middle of Rudy Giuliani's press conference at Four Seasons Landscaping. Yeah. I remember when the networks broke into that press conference and said, hey, yeah, Joe Biden's president. He won. So here's to Rudy Giuliani. I'm going to miss that guy. Okay. So that happened on Saturday, November 7th. On that same day at 5:07 p.m., Marlene Bourne wrote an email. It was an email that she sent to Sidney Powell, then Fox Business host Lou Dobbs, and Tom Fitton. Tom Fitton, he's head of like Judicial Watch or something like that. Something, I don't remember what the name of his organization is. He's a big sweaty guy who has an English degree, but does all this legal stuff in Washington, D.C. And he's been a stop the steal kind of guy, election fraud guy from the get-go. He's been super pro-Trump from day one. She wrote them a long email that falsely claimed that a piece of software had been inserted into Dominion voting machines so that they would change votes from Donald Trump to Joe Biden. A slightly mentally imbalanced artist from Minnesota came up with this on her own and emailed it to Sidney Powell, Lou Dobbs, and Tom Fitton. That email was the source of everything that came after it relative to Dominion voting machines. Her email is where all of that came from. So she sends off this email. Sidney Powell gets it. And the next day, Sunday, November 8th, she's on with Maria Bartiromo on Fox News on Sunday morning and is going through all of the stuff in this email and asserting it as fact that Dominion voting machines contain software which switched 3% of Trump's votes to Joe Biden because, according to Maria Bourne, it was determined that anything higher than that number would raise suspicions. Maria Bourne knows nothing about voting machines, or Marlene Bourne doesn't vote. And she didn't vote in the 2020 election. She doesn't like either political party. She doesn't vote. But for some reason, on the afternoon of Saturday, November 7th, 2020, she sat down and got on the internet and figured out, oh, well, this is how they must have done it. This is how they must have stolen the election from Donald Trump. Her email is the genesis of what would eventually cost Fox News almost $800 million in the settlement of their lawsuit with Dominion. All of this came just from some woman who's an artist in Minnesota. She pulled it out of her ass and sent it to Sidney Powell and Fox News. And they were like, yeah, we're going with this. Let's go with this. And the best part is that none of the people who she sent this email to ever followed up with her. She sent this email off on a Saturday afternoon at 5 p.m. The next morning, it was on Fox News with Sidney Powell and Maria Bartiromo. Think about that. It is gobsmacking. It is absolutely gobsmacking. Bourne told the Minnesota Post in an interview that the idea of voter fraud was a spur-of-the-moment thing because she wasn't really paying attention to the election. She said that she'd never heard of the voting systems company before, but heard the name Dominion somewhere that day and began to research the company, relying on her intuition and what she called her sixth sense, which allows her to connect the dots. I am able to connect things that don't seem to connect. I have this unique vision. I see things that other people don't. It's like that scene from the movie The Sixth Sense where the kid's like, I see dead people. But with Marlene Bourne, it's like she's sitting there saying, I see bullshit that I just made up. Bourne said she used her highly attuned awareness and ability to find a common thread to investigate Dominion voting systems. One of her first discoveries was that Dominion is a Canadian company. Isn't that in itself foreign interference? Bourne asked. Dominion has a U.S. headquarters in Denver, Colorado. This is so bonkers and nutty. The email also contained her theory that late Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia was murdered while being hunted for sport. He actually died in his sleep, even though he was hunting with Dick Cheney. Dick Cheney managed not to shoot Justice Scalia in the face. She also told Sidney Powell and others copied on that email that she was internally decapitated in a 1992 car accident and once was shot in the back after submitting a tip to the FBI. I don't vote and am completely bipartisan in that I dislike both parties. Concerned about the ability to spy on people through technology, Bourne got rid of her cell phone several years ago and only uses a landline. It's just, less than an hour after receiving her email, Sidney Powell forwarded Bourne's email to Maria Bartiromo, and the Fox News host allowed Powell to air claims of vote switching and the Dominion algorithm in an interview the following day. Amazing. It's just amazing. It's amazing. It's amazing. All of that, all of Rudy Giuliani and Jenna Ellis's bullcrap, all of their 60 lawsuits in federal court, all of Sidney Powell's Release the Kraken, all of that stuff came from an email from a whack job in Minnesota who just made it up because she has a sixth sense that allows her to connect the dots where they don't actually connect. It's just mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing. All right, let's talk about the senior senator from the state of Utah, Mike Lee, good old Mike Lee. Mike Lee, despite his denials, was heavily involved in Donald Trump's efforts to overturn the 2020 election. Dozens of text messages between him and Mark Meadows exist. Mike Lee was fully on board with the fake elector scheme that they were running out of the office, out of the Oval Office with John Eastman and Little Kenny Cheesebro. And, you know, Lee, he did end up voting to certify Joe Biden's victory, certify the electoral count, the electoral votes, you know, very early in the morning on January 7th after the insurrection at the Capitol had taken place the day before. But right up until that vote, Mike Lee was neck deep in the fake elector scheme and all of Donald Trump's efforts to overturn the 2020 election. And he was connected with John Eastman. He and John Eastman had been swapping emails. John Eastman had sent him a couple of memos on the fake elector scheme, as well as on the scheme to pressure Vice President Mike Pence to throw out electoral votes. So he was neck deep in all of that crap, man. So what did he do that gets him on Full Potato Friday? And I'm recording this on Monday just because we didn't have all of this stuff worked out last Friday. So it's Full Potato Friday, but it's for last week. What did Mike Lee do? Mike Lee spent this last weekend. So I think it was last Friday when current Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, who definitely gets a full potato fart. You know, the guy who he and his teenage son were monitoring each other's pornography use because they're such devout Christians. That's not a joke. Yeah. Mike Johnson, because he's now Speaker of the House, he released 44,000 hours of security camera footage from January 6th that was filmed by cameras both inside and outside the United States Capitol, covering the entirety of the insurrection and the mouth-breathing inbred howler monkey Gomer Magachud's attack on the Capitol. So over the weekend, Mike Lee zeroes in on one frame from 44,000 hours. And it's an image of a guy wearing a MAGA hat, and it looks like his face is covered. He's inside the Capitol, and he's holding something like this. He's holding something in his hand, like in this kind of position and roughly that kind of shape. And Mike Lee doing a full Ray Epps redux. He picked up on a tweet from a guy named Derek Evans who said, "Is this person flashing a badge? If so, that would prove there were undercover federal agents disguised as MAGA in the Capitol on January 6th. It's their conspiracy theory that the whole thing was instigated by the feds. The whole insurrection was instigated by the feds." The tweet that he picked up on from Derek Evans, by the way, is a former West Virginia lawmaker who pled guilty to felony disorder charges after live streaming himself storming the Capitol on January 6th. Mike Lee retweets it and says, "I can't wait to ask FBI Director Christopher Wray about this at our next oversight hearing. I predict that, as always, his answers will be 97% information free." Obviously, this would be huge if it was true, if that was a Fed flashing a badge. You'll be shocked, I say, to learn that this had been debunked some time ago, and it is not a federal agent. It's a guy named Kevin Lyons, who was recently sentenced to 4 years in prison for what he did at the Capitol on January 6th. So Mike Lee relies on one felon to show an image of another felon because they both think the second felon is a Fed, but he's a felon who's now serving 4 years in prison for storming the Capitol. Mike Lee, God love him, doubled down. Yeah. This guy, Kevin Lyons, was on film saying, "We're storming the Capitol building. I guess we're all going to jail," while they were outside the Capitol. And then he yells, "Let's take it," before heading straight towards the Senate wing doors. And he's screaming at police officers while he walked toward the Senate, saying, "Oath breakers, fucking Nazi bastards, traitors." And then he went and broke into Nancy Pelosi's office and stole a bunch of stuff. That's the guy that Mike Lee thinks is an undercover Fed. Tim Miller over at the Bulwark summed it up. A United States senator looks, so it turns out the thing he was holding in his hand was a vape pen. It wasn't a badge. He was vaping as he was storming the Capitol. He's holding his little vape pen. Yeah. Unbelievable, man. So Tim Miller at the Bulwark sums it up by saying, United States senator looks at a grainy photo of a vape pen 3 years after the storming of the Capitol and wonders if the smoking device might be evidence that the guy in the MAGA hat was really an undercover Fed. This is dude, where's my car level legislating. It's amazing. It's just absolutely amazing. And then Mike Lee doubled down because Liz Cheney retweeted him saying, "Hey, Mike, heads up. A nutball conspiracy theorist appears to be posting from your account." So then he's like, "Why didn't Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger ever refer to any of these tapes? Shouldn't the January 6th committee have been demanding answers to these questions? Maybe they never maybe they never questioned their own narrative. Maybe they were just too busy selectively leaking the text messages of Republicans they wanted to defeat. Well, one of those Republicans was Mike Lee in his text messages with Mark Meadows about their efforts to overturn the 2020 election. Amazing. Amazing. Mike Lee goes on to tweet, given the evidence they apparently suppressed, how much footage and how many other records do you think Nancy Pelosi and the January 6th committee deliberately lost or destroyed? The answer is none. But Mike Lee is one of those guys who used to be viewed as like a respectable, serious Republican legislator, constitutional scholar, again, until Trump came along. And I remember before Election Day 2020, because God, what do we call that tape? The grab him by the whatever tape. That was released, like 3 weeks before Election Day? And I remember like so many Republicans, and Mike Lee was one of them. Mike Lee completely renounced Donald Trump after he saw that tape. He said, I've got daughters. How am I going to support this guy or vote for this guy when I have daughters and this tape comes out and he says what he says? Well, he voted for him, and he voted against impeaching him, and he tried to help him overturn the 2020 election. He threw away his entire reputation for Donald Trump. Great work, Mike. Yeah. Ridiculous. All right. That brings us to our fourth potato. Colorado Judge Sarah B. Wallace, who issued a decision last Friday in a Section 3 14th Amendment lawsuit that had been brought in Colorado by an organization called CREW, Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics, and then something that starts with a W. In Washington. That's it. In Washington. So, okay. Just to remind, Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, it's a post-Civil War addition to the Constitution that was ratified in 1868, basically to keep Confederates out of the federal government, to keep enemies of the Union, enemies of the United States, people who had participated in going to war against the United States, to keep them out of government. Because how are you going to assess the loyalties of somebody like that? So it reads, no person shall hold any office, civil or military, under the United States or under any state, having previously taken an oath as an officer of the United States to support the Constitution of the United States, who shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against same or given aid or comfort to enemies thereof. Now, I'm giving her a half a potato on this one. She didn't go full potato, but she definitely went half potato. So we're going to talk about two components here. We're going to talk about the factual findings that are in her order. And it's like 102 pages long. I haven't read the entire thing yet. But she made findings of fact at the trial level after hearing evidence. When cases go up on appeal, judges are at the appellate level are reviewing errors of law, meaning the law as applied to the facts. It is next to impossible at the appellate level to get appellate judges to change anything that's contained in the findings of fact section of a trial court order, because they defer to the trial judge. The trial judge is the one who heard all of the testimony from all of the witnesses, was in the same room, was able to assess their credibility, witnessed them, heard them speak, heard their voices, heard how they answered questions, saw how they presented. The appellate court doesn't get the benefit of any of that. So they may read the trial court transcript of testimony, but almost never do they ever overturn or make any changes to a trial court's finding of fact. That never happens. So what did Judge Wallace rule as being proven in a court of law as factual. Donald Trump put forth no evidence at the hearing that he believed his claims of voter fraud, despite overwhelming evidence that there was none. Trump knew his claims of voter fraud were false. Trump sought to corruptly overturn the election results through direct pressure on Republican office holders in various states, both before and after the Electoral College met and voted in their respective states. Trump knew that his supporters were angry and prepared to use violence to stop the steal, including physically preventing Vice President Pence from certifying the election. Despite knowing the risk of violence and knowing that crowd members were angry and armed, Trump still attended the rally and directed the crowd to march to the Capitol. Trump's speech at the Ellipse that morning on January 6th incited imminent lawless violence. Trump's call to fight like hell and fight was intended as and was understood by a portion of that crowd as a call to arms. Trump's conduct and words were the factual cause of and a substantial contributing factor to the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol. Trump's 2:24 p.m. tweet on January 6th that Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what should have been done to protect our country and our Constitution, giving states a chance to certify a corrected set of facts, not the fraudulent or inaccurate ones which they were asked to previously certify. USA demands truth. That tweet caused further violence at the Capitol. Trump had the authority to call in reinforcements on January 6th and chose not to exercise it, thereby recklessly endangering the lives of law enforcement, Congress, and the attackers on January 6th, 2021. And finally, the court heard no evidence that Trump did not support the mob's common purpose of disrupting the constitutional transfer of power. All of those statements have now been deemed as factually proven in a court of law in the United States. They are part of the record. Fact. So that's outstanding. That section, outstanding. Absolutely outstanding. He's an insurrectionist. And then the judge went on to decide a legal definition for the term insurrection. And she said an insurrection at the time of the ratification of the 14th Amendment was understood to refer to any public use of force or threat of force by a group of people to hinder or prevent the execution of law. That's the definition that she went with. She rejected Trump's proposed definition that an insurrection is confined to the taking up of arms and preparing to wage war upon the United States. In other words, Trump's team argued that only people with guns in hand and military plans drawn up count as an insurrection. So, where did it go off the rails? Well, it went off the rails in her reasoning about who is an officer in the United States government. And she made the determination that that term officer does not apply to the presidency. So she gets a half a potato for that. She's lucky she doesn't get a full potato. Now, so she said, she ruled that despite the clear language of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment about insurrection, and she determined that he engaged in an insurrection and he aided and abetted an insurrection, she's like, he still gets to be on the ballot because he's not an officer under the 14th Amendment. That is a splitting of hairs that she very, 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 very easily could have gone the other way with if she had wanted to. If she had wanted to, she very, very easily could have done that. I don't know why she didn't do that, but she didn't. She didn't do that. That's right. So she gets 3 farts for that. This case is going to go up on appeal to the Colorado State Supreme Court. Hopefully from there, it will go up on appeal to the United States Supreme Court. What's going to happen with this at the United States Supreme Court? Boy, it's anybody's guess, man. But I'm going to tell you what: the three most recently appointed conservative justices, appointed by Donald Trump, they want to be rid of this guy. They're sick and tired of being called Trump's judges. And as horrific as they are on issues like voting and campaign finance and abortion and all kinds of other things, as horrific as this court is on that, I think there's a 50-50 chance that they throw his ass off the ballot because they want to be rid of him. They want to be rid of him. And if they agree with the trial court's findings of fact, which they almost don't have any choice but to agree with that Donald Trump committed an insurrection against the United States and aided and abetted an insurrection against the United States, then all they got to do is say, yeah, he was an officer. And then bam, that's it. That's the ball game for little Donnie Two Scoops. But we're going to have to wait and see what happens. The next step, I believe, is for this case to be appealed to the Colorado State Supreme Court. I don't know anything about the Colorado State Supreme Court. I'm going to read up on it and learn a little bit about it. And then from there, I hope that it just goes directly to the U.S. Supreme Court, because they are going to have to decide this issue before the 2024 election. They are not going to be able to avoid it. They're just not. They're not going to be able to avoid it. All right, so that wraps up the very first episode of Full Potato Friday. I hope you guys liked it. We're going to be getting an email address together for you guys soon. It's going to be on the Patreon page. And so, you can leave questions in the comments below, or you can use that email address and send us questions. You can send us suggestions. You can send us insults. I fully expect some of that to come in. You can you can email us whatever you want to. Email us pictures of your dogs. I like pictures of dogs. So anyway, thanks again to everybody from TikTok for following me on over here. And I'll see you soon.